Good morning. This is Scott Elliott Hicks, and today I wanted to talk about the second key to entering into living thinking in an anthroposophical or spiritual scientific way. And I outline this general process in my books, my last two books. You can see these things on Amazon: The Resurrection of Thinking, Steiner's Anthroposophy, and the Postmodernism of Badiou, Deleuze, Derrida, and Levinas, and also my newest book, Earthly, Transcendental, and Spiritual Logic, from Husserl's Phenomenology to Steiner's Anthroposophy. So you can check those out to see more about what I'm talking about here if you don't know anything about my work. So in my last video, I described the first key, differentiating between sense perception and thinking. So today I want to dive a bit more into the thinking angle. And this is something which has really occupied me for the last 25 years or so in my philosophical and anthroposophical studies, figuring out and experiencing what a concept is. What is a concept? How can we create a concept? What does this really mean in terms of intuitive thinking, in terms of living thinking in the anthroposophical sense? So I would like to do a survey of a variety of statements by Rudolf Steiner first on this issue. And then after that, I will focus on Deleuze. We'll look at a few examples, and you can attempt to experience this on your own. It's a place where many people are unconscious altogether, the experiencing of a living idea or a concept. Okay, so let's take a look, first of all, at Rudolf Steiner's The Philosophy of Freedom, or The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity, GA4. So here he describes what concepts and ideas are. He says, through thinking, concepts and ideas arise. What a concept is cannot be said in words. Words can only make the human being aware of the fact that he has concepts. When someone sees a tree, his thinking reacts to his observation. To the object, there comes then an ideal counterpart, and he regards the object and the ideal counterpart as belonging together. So we're trying to focus on living, active thinking, thinking where I'm watching the step by step, the flow by flow motion as a will-filled activity in my thinking. So I am focusing not on the colors and sensations around me, but rather the meaning forms and the understanding gestures that I experience in my thinking. And he suggests that through this activity, concepts and ideas arise. So we look through meaning space and we recognize that I understand the meaning of a statue. I recognize and understand the meaning of a audio speaker. I understand and can intuitively experience the concept of a cello. All these things are experienced in thinking. So, but notice he says something strange here. What a concept is cannot be said in words. Words can only make the human being aware of the fact that he has concepts. So a concept is definitely not a word. It's not a definition in the modern sense of, let's say, analytical philosophy, where a concept is a mere definition or a mere proposition. But a concept is something that's experienced inside the concept plane, inside the mental plane, inside essentially the virtual living spiritual plane. And it's not abstract, it's not shadowy, it's a full experience, which in fact is more vivid and more living than our normal sense experience. So when we experience the concept in its full reality. What a concept is cannot be said in words. I can only point people to this experience of my thinking livingly and willfully penetrating into the center of the concept of any cello whatsoever, made out of any kind of wood, could be made out of steel. When my thinking is surfing on the planes of concepts where they're all linked together universally, I'm actually moving with thinking will, with thinking organs in this experience of concepts, of meaning, of pure meaning. So I can't draw that on the board. I can't write that in a language. I can't say that. I can't, the experience of those concepts is not something that's contained in the sounds of English. When I say concept, this horrible word brought over from Latin, meaning captus, capturing, and cum, meaning from cum, meaning together, things that are brought or captured and unified. When I make this sound out of my mouth, that's not the experience of walking in intuitive thinking where I'm self-consciously seeing the I creating concepts. No, I mean, this experience is super sensible. It's certainly something that people can experience while still on the earth. I mean, that's what thinking is. That's what when we're communicating, this is what's happening continuously. So we can only use words to point someone's consciousness towards this place where they're more or less subconscious or we're barely conscious. Okay, let's take a look at another example here. I wanted to differentiate between a mental image and thinking. The philosophy of freedom and all of Steiner's work really it's a living experience. Steiner is really never representing things. He's always indicating in his lectures, in his books, if we can enliven them into real experience, we can surf along with him in his living experience in every single sentence. But that puts the pressure on us. He wrote everything so neutrally that when we kill it in our normal process of representing, we essentially reverse all of his activities. So we have to enliven this. We have to find our way back to the reality that he's describing. Of course, we're not saying that we're equal to Rudolf Steiner, but we're trying to make it more and more alive. And eventually one experiences the more and more depth every time one reads the philosophy of freedom or theosophy or occult science, etc. Okay. So the difference is we're trying to differentiate and experience the difference between a mental picture and thinking. So mental picture, memory image, mental picture, word association, or it's personal, it has a sense character, it has a perspective, and it's dying. It's really organized by the shuffling of shapes of association in ordinary memory and subjective picturing in the head. So what does this mean? For example, when I look at this plant that I have in my house, when I look at it in this moment, and then when I turn away and look at my mental picture of it, I can see that the mental picture has the same angle that I'm looking at it, as if we're two objects separated in space and normal consciousness. I'm looking at this plant from the angle of my kitchen toward my living room. So when I look into my memory image, it also shares this perspective orientation. I'm looking at it from one side in my mental picturing as well. So it's a memory image stored in the nervous system. Okay, also, but when I look at the concept of any plant in general, when I'm thinking about any plant whatsoever, I can certainly begin to approach what a concept is by imaginatively moving around all possible plants inside my mind's eye. and then eventually get rid of those images and find my way to a place where I understand the meaning of any plant at all. The moment when I understand the meaning of a plant, like a explosion in thinking, it's like a light that shines up at the periphery, like a sun shining from afar. At this moment, the concept of a plant appears, but the concept of the plant doesn't have this perspectival aspect. I'm not looking at it from one angle. I'm living with it. It's merging with me in the thinking sphere. It's grasped through the arm of pure thinking. It doesn't have this character of looking at it from an angle based on the fact that I saw something in space and took a photo of it on the canvas of memory. Okay, so let's take a look at what Steiner says about this, the difference between thinking, real thinking, and this subjective, perspectival mental picturing. So this is at the end of the philosophy of freedom. Through thinking, within the very realm of experience itself, we overcome the one-sidedness of mere perceiving. So that's exactly what I was talking about. When we experience this, perceiving has one-sidedness, and of course, this could refer to the fact that perception and thinking are two different aspects of human experience, but also the one-sidedness of our perspective when I'm viewing things subjectively. We cannot figure out the nature of what is real through abstract conceptual hypotheses, through purely conceptual thinking after the fact. This is Nachdenken in the German. So it's really we can't find the living experience, the living thinking experience of the concept of any plant whatsoever in the real thinking sphere when I'm walking amongst living concepts, when they're meeting me, when they're thinking me, when they're showing me what meaning is from inside, giving the gifts of meaning to me inside thinking. We can't merely we can't find the reality of the plant. We can't find the spiritual reality of the plant through abstract thinking. So this is the place where concept can have a dead meaning. It can mean more or less abstract. So when I'm abstractly thinking, this is something that we do all the time. I look at a variety of different objects in real sense experience, and then I take all those mental pictures and I organize them into a linear structure that then I use words to associate to different points. But this is all a subjective activity. So it's abstract by the very fact that I'm not experiencing intuitively the concept. I'm not penetrating the real living sphere. So this is oftentimes when people talk about concepts in everyday experience, or when they're talking or studying anthroposophy, they say concepts and they really mean this abstract experience of thinking that's stored in the head. There's a real boundary between the living spiritual world and our subjective experience. In the dying part of the ether body, the kind of boundary between the astral body and the spiritual world itself. This is a real boundary. This is part of the threshold that's between everyday experience and the spiritual world. So there has to be a moral, a moral transition, a moral confrontation, a real look. I got to look at myself honestly, without crying and giving up, without shame, and in order to see this real experience of thinking. And that means I have to recognize that 99% of my thinking is this abstract representational association that's taking place subjectively. Okay, but he says, insomuch as we find, in addition to perceptions, their ideas, we live within what is real. So here he's talking about the idea as this is more or less the experience of the living concept. An idea is a collection of living concepts that are organized in an organic way in living thinking, in virtual space on the concept plane. When I'm self-conscious of the moment when I'm organizing concepts and I can go through their various stages, not subjectively inside the head, but actually outside of my body in the flowing experience of the concept world. And I can experience this not merely with the head, but with the moral, feeling all the moral qualities of the thinking plane, and it's a willful activity. So I'm walking there with my spiritual being in living experience, and everything has a moral effect there. Everything is made out of morality there. So I can't just use it for my own subjective benefit. I get nothing personally out of this experience, and we have to be honest about that fact where we open up our devotion to the real spirit. So he's saying percepts, the flowing world of percepts, the living world of intuitive thinking, this whole flowing together where the I flows amongst this entire world is the real. So that's why, Steiner's monism is a legitimate monism because there is only one being, but it has many poles, many seasons, many months. Monism does not seek, in addition to experience, anything unexperienceable in the beyond, but rather sees in concept and perception what's real. It spins out of these mere abstract no metaphysics because it sees in the concept by itself only the one side of reality and does not have to seek outside his world some unexperienceable higher reality. So this is meant to move against metaphysical realism, or I'm merely representing angels, or I'm merely representing the idea of God as a subjective picture. Steiner's not interested in people that are describing angels from subjective pictures. This has nothing to do with reality. Only when we're experiencing the spiritual world, the angelic beings, can we talk about it from the living. A living intuitive concept is the place where the concept actually touches the spiritual being and is organized and in a living way out of this meeting with the other, becoming the other in real thinking experience, in real spiritual experience. And on the other hand, Steiner here is trying to overcome the Kantian perspective that the in itself is something that's unknowable, and I can only experience representations. Once again, this is normal experience. This is totally normal experience. Luciferic projection that I think I'm experiencing angels by talking about them or something because I have good feelings. And on the other hand, the Ahrimanic aspect where I believe that I can't get to what Steiner's experiencing because it's beyond me. So we have to break apart these two enemies of knowledge and look at ourselves honestly, open up our heart to this moral dimension, and allow the real thinking to arrive in this experience of pure expectation. Okay. The monist refrains from seeking the absolutely real anywhere other than in experience. That's the philosophy of freedom is experience in every single sentence. If you're not experiencing it in living thinking, you are not experiencing the real spiritual being of the book. This book is a spiritual artwork that's like a living organism. And if you're not linking up your own being with this living organism while remaining self conscious, then you're not reading the book. You're just representing the book and storing it inside dead mental pictures inside a fairy theater. Because he recognizes the content of experience itself as real. The experience is the real. And he is satisfied with this reality because he knows that thinking has the power to guarantee it. It's a self-demonstration. This is that self-sustaining activity that Steiner mentions in the preface to the Philosophy of Freedom. I start to recognize my I am, which exists before the concepts of body, space, and time, inner and outer, objective, subjective. It's the one who creates all these concepts. The I am clothes itself in these variety of concepts. So it's on the scene first. And what does it do? It thinks. It thinks it's given the power of thinking in its own I to clothe itself. Its I am nature is beyond this, but it's clothing itself in concepts by its interaction with other spiritual beings in this harmonic reharmonization process. So let's see. That's the self. Once I recognize that, then I'm establishing my own foundation. I mean, that is my own free foundation. It's not subjective. It has nothing to do with my personal Scott. Well, it has little to do with my personal Scott. My incarnation on the earth is a shadowy reflection of this spiritual I that lives there and sustains its own process, and we can connect with that. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about anthroposophy. We can connect with this intuitive experience of the I, of the spirit self, of, let's say, the consciousness soul becoming aware of its own activity in spirit, in its divine activity spiritually, to get an inkling of the spirit self. We can experience this already in right now in 2020. We're not necessarily jumping over anything by doing that. This is the process, anthroposophical process of self knowledge. So that sustains its own experience. I'm not saying that it's not as if I'm creating the whole world. I'm still morally connected with the whole universe and with the spirit of the great master, the good master, who is the leader, the highest leader of the whole solar system, and is now living in his etheric appearance. Um, so this is the one who gives me the I, because he is the great I am. He gives me my power of my own I, but he also gives me freedom. So he allows me to set up my own space through his sacrifice. Once we experience that, there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about anything anymore. So that's why he's satisfied. Monism shows that in our knowing activity, we grasp reality in its true form, not in a subjective picture that is, as it were, inserts itself between man and reality. So the subjective mental picture is not the concept that's formed during this flowing organic knowledge process. So that's what I'm trying to describe here a little bit. Okay, let's see here. Let's look at one more passage from the Philosophy of Freedom. Steiner describes that there's only one concept that's experienced by each person when we're thinking it. So we can unite in this community experience of thinking the concept of any plant, thinking the concept of a coffee cup, thinking the concept of a boot, thinking the concept of an elephant or a cello or pressure. So he says here, the content of this concept is a matter. I'm sorry. For the content of this concept, it is a matter of indifference whether the human bearer of consciousness who grasps it is A or B, Scott or Nellie. But the content of this concept will be grasped in an individual way by each of the two bearers of consciousness. So this shows you that the concept, as an intuitive experience, it has just like the plant, it has a withering and a blooming aspect to it, and a transitional aspect. It has a spiritual aspect, it has this virtual aspect, this etheric aspect. It links with the spiritual world, and it also has this place where it links up to our subjective experiences, and it can be totally abstract and totally dead. So, and it also passes through, in order for us to pass into the experience of living thinking, conceptual thinking, we have to cross the threshold. So that means there's a moral confrontation here of seeing oneself, seeing all the evil and reversed nature and self-love inside of our being. So what I'm trying to say here is that in order to pass over into the real experience of a concept, we have to go through this moral confrontation. So recognizing that concept itself is each concept is a living, dying organism penetrated by the moral threshold. So it's both living and dying. So we can create let's say, our contemporary experience of thinking can also be enlivened and awakened by the Christ event that's happening after the 20th century. It's happening right now, that the whole earth is undergoing a change through his work. Each concept now can be awakened and enlivened by its interaction with the Christ spirit. He's everywhere. He's in every concept. He's the greatest creator of concepts. He's the greatest science fiction writer of all time. And he creates concepts that we take thousands and perhaps millions of years to activate, to become. So there's a wonderful experience here, but through the reality that Christ is the one spiritual being that's gone through death, through Jesus of Nazareth on the earth, he's able to relate to this human aspect of dying, and in this way overcome the Ahrimanic reversal, because he's experienced death, the center of the Ahrimanic spirit. In a sense, he can overcome this in us, and so he can teach us how to overcome the dying in our thinking, and then we can use all these dead shadows that we surround ourselves with in our little closet of our eggshell, our little fishbowl that we swim around in of representations. We can then take all of this wonderful, rich experience of reversing and destroying the world, killing the spiritual world, as Yeshayahu Ben Haron talks about in all of his books. My good teacher, who shows us that when we kill the spiritual world in every formation of a representation, then we can empty out this fishbowl, to empty ourselves out, and we can use this rich experience of all the colored stones then to spiritualize them, to spiritualize our thinking, to take us to the to recreate, to, let's say, create new substance in the earth, and to spiritualize our thinking, and to take a little bit of the substance from Ahriman away from him. Okay. So each of us experience let's say at the end of the concept, at the most spiritual part of the concept, it's meeting the formless spiritual being. The real spiritual beings, they don't really have forms in their highest sense, but we create a form out of them. The pure meaning gestures are the moods of cosmic thoughts, which are formless at their highest level, but we create forms out of those. So when we meet the highest level of the concept, doesn't have a form, so we create these individual, we dive into it, we become it, and out of that becoming, a whole community of people can recognize the identical meaning reality in intuition, but out of this individual meaning reality, we create imaginations which are slightly different, and but because they come out of the formless experience of, what, I don't know what to call this, the highest heavenly world, they can all overlap like different colors of the rainbow out of the same thing, and they're the same. They have the same intuitive content, so we can understand each other. We can understand each other, although we may have to understand another person, set aside all our personal creations that we've made in order for them to shine with their individualized concept into our soul body. Okay, so this is one thing I wanted to mention here. Notice that he says, in thinking, we have given to us the element which fuses our particular individuality into one whole with the cosmos. Now, you can't overlook this. This means we join with the whole universe. We become the macrocosm. We join with the whole spiritual world through crossing the threshold, through thinking. So, why is it important to spiritualize thinking? This is another quote from Steiner. He says, the things the visionary clairvoyant describes are, it is true, put together in a fashion that is not to be found on the physical plane, but the pictures are nevertheless composed of elements of the physical plane. So this is showing us this representational element that's still in people that have not been trained according to spiritual science or anthroposophy, that have become clairvoyant through pictures, basically, in an older way, that are not trained in logical thinking, that can't perceive concepts, that can't intuitively dive into the world of pure thinking and live with pure concepts. This isn't without justification, but you will see that such a picture has within it something that belongs to the earth. The forms and pictures in your vision that are taken from the physical plane do not belong to the spiritual world. They only give a picture of the spiritual world in the domain of the senses. This I've set forth clearly in Occult Science. I have there shown that present-day clairvoyance must indeed be of a pictorial character in its early stages, but it must not remain there. It must develop to the point where the last remnant of what is earthly and the visions is cast aside. There is, of course, a certain danger for the clairvoyant when he thus strips off the last remnant of the earth. For example, when he sees the angel and then strips off all that's earthly, he's faced with the danger of seeing nothing at all, right? Because the real angel is formless, the formless spirit being. There's no words for it in the illimitable unfolding of the formless divine nature in the highest heavenly world. There's no forms there, but it's still alive. It's still something we can experience with our will. It's like our will. Our will doesn't really have forms and gestures in our experience, but it's like pure warmth, that we can experience, especially a good place to practice conceptual real conceptual intuitive thinking is by studying occult science, where he describes the evolution of old Saturn, and there he strips away all of the pictorial character. So if we also connect with old Saturn, which is a living experience going on now, if from the highest spiritual world, we can uh, strip off this pictorial character. But then he says, we don't want to, the danger is it becomes luciferic, it becomes totally formless. And we just say, oh, I feel great. I become pure Buddha self, and I forget, I don't worry, and I be happy about everything. So that's not what this is. He says, what is it that can prevent one from losing the vision altogether on entering actually into the spiritual world? The seed that can spring up out of thinking and out of thinking activity, intuitive spiritual thinking, not representing. Representing is the pictorial character, which is based on earthly experience. So that's never going to help you. Thinking is conceptual, intuitive thinking is a clear path that can take you. It's the one thing that can take you from earthly experience to the spiritual experience. And it becomes deeper and deeper. I don't claim to be anyone with, I'm not an initiate. I'm not a person who has spoken to spirits in any, it's not something I do daily. But through my own experience of crafting my individual path through intuitive thinking, trained in the philosophy of freedom and trained under Yeshayahu Ben Aharon, and working with the Global Event College and the Independent School of Spiritual Science for 11 years, this has allowed me to create a clear path from earthly experience to spiritual experience. So as Steiner says, the moral intuition you find in philosophy of freedom, it only takes you halfway, but it's a totally safe path. It's even safer than the knowledge of higher worlds, planned exercises and such, because it has this saving power that it overcomes the luciferic aspect to a certain extent by this clear intuitive thinking. So this now can become imagination with a capital I, which is something that I'm experiencing in a beginning stage. So that's my level, working with imagination in a very beginning level with and also inspiration sometimes, and intuition coming from behind, coming from pure meaning form. So moral intuition can become eventually, I gather, intuition with a capital I. In other words, standing and conversing with spiritual beings in the spiritual world itself, becoming spiritual beings, which I only have an inkling of right now. But I'm showing the importance of this philosophy of freedom path, which is basically totally ignored by anthroposophists. Let's be honest. Okay, and I just wanted to show you why I like to turn to Deleuze and the postmoderns, because they, if you get kind of trapped in anthroposophical representations, he can help you get out a little bit, although he's a complicated thinker. So this is from What is Philosophy? Here Deleuze is talking about swimming and diving and moving around in the plane of consistency, the concept planes, where I create new personas. I create a kind of individuality that's able to be broken apart into multiple I ams, multiple personalities, in all the and he talks about it as a kind of schizophrenic experience, but we can, as anthroposophists, approach it in a sober, really sober way, where we can become multiple points of view, and experience all these things soberly and with heartfelt devotion. So he's talking about this experience on becoming many concepts. Okay, so we're thinking in concepts. It remains co-present to all its determinations without proximity or distance, traverses them at infinite speed without limit speed, and which makes of them so many inseparable variations on which it confers an equipotentiality without confusion. So here he's talking about the experience of the I as an event, being thought by the other, by the rest of the world. I give up my security of my self love and I'm broken apart in the event. And I see that in pure thinking, I'm traversing many different concepts, trying to understand my experience here. And notice my thinking can traverse this plane at infinite speed. It's able to go from the idea of Umo, the planet, uh, or one of the nebulae, to the concept of a banana instantly at infinite speed, faster than the speed of light. And there's no limit to this speed. When I'm thinking, I don't have to slow down, but I can move through this at infinite speed. And it's inseparable variations. So here he's talking about the fact that the concept has this inseparable variation in it. As I was mentioning, individual people can penetrate into the formless activity of thinking, and they can create multiple variations out of this, which still contain the living seed. They're connected and they have the living seed of the meaning inside of it. But the meaning itself is evolving. So once you make a concept, it's not dead, it keeps on living. The whole universe keeps on living, and a living concept is connected with this living reality. And it confers an equipotentiality without confusion. So I'm self conscious. All of the whole intuitive experience on the planes is filled with power, with virtuality, with vitality. And it's certainly I can be confused when I'm reading Deleuze, but the the wonderful nature of thinking is that it itself is able to organize this chaotic experience into clear deductive reasoning, clear inference. But the clear inference doesn't cut out this chaotic growing of becoming. But nevertheless, I can soberly think about a chemistry experiment where I take diamonds and I melt them down with a torch and uh, blow oxygen over top of it, then freeze it down in a test tube that has liquid nitrogen around it, and turn it into this frozen, this solid form of CO2, this dry ice stuff, and then I can uh, melt this once again, keep it in a container, and put it into under pressure into water and make carbonated water out of melting diamonds. I saw this great experience by Niall Red on YouTube. You should check out his channel, which is fantastic if you're interested in chemistry. So you're able to think through these ideas totally rationally and clearly, nevertheless, experiencing this virtuality. And notice what Deleuze says here, which is surprising, I think, in its relationship to Steiner. He says, we have seen that this was the status of the concept as pure event or reality of the virtual. So the event where uh, I see that I'm thought by the entire world. I am thought by the world. This is where all my control of my and my self-love meets the threshold, and I'm thought through by the reality of the world. So there's a pulsing reality here. Yes, I can have some control over my thinking, but nevertheless, I'm definitely woven together with spiritual beings and watched over by my guardian angel who protects me from becoming too fragmented in this conceptual experience. So they take the veils off very slowly. And he says, and doubtless concepts are not limited to just one and the same brain, since each one of them constitutes a domain of survey, and the transitions from one concept to another remain irreducible. So notice here he's saying that, the the brain is connected. Basically he's recognizing the brain itself, which is the concept of a brain, certainly has its sensible aspects, but um, that a brain, the brain is created out of the concept plane and not vice versa, and that human beings are all thinking into the same concept plane. And it's becoming different. It's differentiating itself. Our thinking is self-differentiating itself. It's active at every minute. But this is something that it's not limited to just one and the same brain. All brains are formed out of the concept planes, so to speak. It's a great way to enliven your thinking by jumping into Deleuze. This is from Qu'est-ce que la philosophie? What is philosophy? With Félix Guattari, who is always forgotten, unfortunately. Okay. This video is becoming long, so I wanted to give you here at the end of the video some opportunities to experience this together. I know that I talk very quickly. The great thing about a YouTube video of me is that you can pause it. You can slow down the speed at 75%, so I can speak much more slowly, especially for those people who are listening and from other countries listening who are much more well versed in Finnish or Swedish or Norwegian or German or Spanish or Portuguese or whatever. So the a couple of things I wanted to give you for your own practice. I'll go through them rather quickly, but you can also pause the video and feel free to explore this on your own. See if you can experience these things on your own to differentiate between mental image, subjective mental image, and a real experience of this intuitive thinking in a concept. What is a concept? So let's take a look at some examples here. Okay, let's start with these two elements here: the tactile representation and weight. So if you were trying to differentiate between what's represented and what's more the real concept. So if you take a plant in your hand, plants are easily accessible, but it could be whatever. Take a plant in your hand and feel its leaves. When you touch the leaves, you'll notice how smooth or whatever. Or if you have stinging nettle, then it's a bad idea to use stinging nettle. But in any case, you could use that and then set it aside and look in your memory, and you'll experience that. Oh, I actually have this touch representation. I have this mental image of what it's like to touch a plant. And you'll notice then, if you carefully examine your consciousness, that all of your mental representations, they have this tactile, this haptic, they call it technically, this tactile representation, this tactile aspect, the touch element in the memory pictures. So if I think of a banana, immediately I can imagine the softness of its skin. If I think of a dog, I also could imagine the feeling instantly, the feeling of petting the fur, the soft fur that it might have. So notice that it's a wonderful thing, but also it can enclose us even more strongly in our subjective shell of representations, which is valuable, but we're trying to break through that to a certain extent in a flexible, sober way. So then we notice that when I set aside the touch representation of the plant and try to think the concept of the plant without any image. So I think of it has a root, it develops from a seed into a sprout, and the sprout grows leaves in a particular way, and the plant then perhaps has blossoms, then it withers away and dies. It has seeds that are produced. The seeds get hardened shell around them, then they can go into the earth, and this whole process can begin again. And then we set aside those mental images and just experience the concept of any plant at all, any plant whatsoever. We understand what the meaning of a root is. Can I experience with my thinking the meaning of any leaf at all? Can I experience the pure meaning gesture as if it's a robe of light, which I'm touching with my thinking fingers, and it's appearing it's thinking me. I have to be coming together. I'm merging together in thinking space with the pure element of a plant. Now, when you're experiencing this, you can ask yourself, oh, does it have, am I approaching it from one angle? Am I seeing it from one angle? And does it have this touch representation to it? And you'll find, oh no, it doesn't. The concept of a plant doesn't have this touch representation, doesn't have the angle that you're looking at it representation. Now, it could still have the flexible herb flance type imaginative variation experience to it, which is okay. That's a good, if you can get to that point and see that point and set aside that rotating flexible, I don't know what you want to call it, this virtual potentiality of flexible rotating uh, uh, pure possibility of seeing on the representation plane, but still try to set that aside and say, how do I know that I'm thinking of the concept of a plant at all and not a banana or an elephant? You see that your thinking knows instantly that it's thinking of a plant. How does your thinking know what it's thinking? Well, excuse me, because concepts and categories are the landscapes in thinking world. So that's a good thing to pursue again and again. It's tactile representation. Another thing that you can try out is the uh, representation, differentiating between the representation of weight and the concept of weight of something. So let's say that I pick up this coffee cup and experience its weight, right? Notice how much it weighs, and I feel the experience of weight. Then I put it down and I look into my memory pictures, my memory experience, and you notice that this one, it could have visual angle that's coming from the way that I looked at the coffee cup, but let's not concentrate on that. Let's concentrate on the feeling, the representation of the weight, of how much it weighed. And you can see that there's a kind of gravity aspect to this. There's a pulling down aspect to that. And in order to remember it, I kind of have to lift up. I have to lift up my own memory body. I have to lift it up in kind of the same amount as the cup originally weighed. So, but this is still representational. Uh, I can make a nice transition, though, here across the threshold to the living thinking by penetrating into the concept of any cup whatsoever. So if I go one way and I intuitively think of any concept whatsoever, what's the meaning of a cup? You could ask yourself, oh, does the meaning of any cup at all, any possible cup made out of any material like metal or ceramic or plastic or whatever, or glass, does the concept, the pure concept of a cup, have this weight character that I felt in representation? And you can investigate this on your own. But the answer is no, or it's not an experienced, there's not really an experience of gravity in the same way in the pure intuitive thinking. So I can then come back and experience the weight, and I can go into this process another way. I can enter into the living experience another way. I could focus on who's lifting my memory body when I'm remembering the idea of lifting up the weight of the cup. And then I slowly realize, wait, who's lifting this up? Well, it's the I. It's my own spirit I, my own soul, and I, which is lifting up the my own self when I pull it out of its gravity sphere. And so I could slowly set aside those earthly experiences and open myself, open my heart with devotion, see myself with all my subjective problems and all my deep down evil nature at the threshold. And then I could gently and patiently and soberly wait for the I, the spiritual I, to waken me from the outside and recognize that this experience of the spiritual I has gravity and has levity, and it also has the expansiveness that can move through the breath, and it has this I am nature, which is self-creating. and it's filled with light and love and warmth. So this is not exactly going into the conceptual. This is more of a it's more of a knowledge of higher worlds process rather than a philosophy of freedom process. But it also, this representation of weight has different ways to get out of there. Okay, I wanted to look at the deodorant and smell as another example that you can use. So when you might take some deodorant or perfume and smell it, have the mental image, uh, and then you set that aside, and you remember in your mental remembering, your mental memory of smell, which sometimes can be difficult to reactivate, but I think you'll be able to do it, especially if you choose a really strong smell like stink bugs or a skunk or something like that, strong perfume, and then you uh, remember this smell. Okay, the sense experience of smell. But then when you think the pure concept of any deodorant whatsoever, any kind of uh, any kind of thing which purifies the smell, the concept of any container that it's put in. Okay, I mean, it seems like deodorant, when I'm thinking intuitively, the concept of deodorant, it's connected to the concept of smell because it's something which purifies smell. But you should ask yourself as you're investigating this, where does the subjective personal memory of this particular smell of citrus deodorant or stink bugs, how does this enter into the pure intuitive thought of concept of any deodorant at all? And you could ask yourself, does the living in the concept of intuitive experiencing in the ocean of pure thought that we're swimming in all the time, does this have that same smell? Does it have the smell? And the answer has to be no. It really doesn't contain the same smell because the concept of deodorant doesn't have the individual particular smell. That's something which is subjective and representational. So this one you can investigate further. I haven't experienced it very much. You can investigate the mysteries of smell by looking into Yeshayahu Ben-Haron's book Cognitive Yoga, where he has a whole chapter on deactualizing smell, which is brilliant and unequaled. Nobody else has ever done this work before. Okay, and then a couple other things you could do if you're interested in following this through, this philosophy of freedom path. You could investigate the difference between the representation of pressure and the concept of the intuitive experience of the concept of pressure. And the representation and definition of pressure is that the mathematical definition is that it's pushing against all sides. So the liquid is pushing against all sides of the hose when it's going through, and it's pushing forward and pushing back. But when I intuitively get rid of the mathematical concepts and try to follow the concept of pressure to intuitively experience it on the concept plane, to think it through, I can actually experience, my meeting with the concept of pressure. And I could ask myself, how do I experience pressure inside the interior of the concept of pressure itself? Once again, is there a surface area that I'm pushing against in the concept of the pressure, concept of pressure intuitively experienced? And the answer is no. There are qualities of pure thinking that I can experience and I can describe, but it always has a back door. So there's always an escape velocity, there's an escape pressure, there's a doorway that opens out of out of the concept of pressure because it becomes alive and formless. So there's always a place where the pressure would escape in the concept of pressure, where the interior of the substance would escape in the concept of pressure as I intuitively experience it. But in the representation of pressure, in the earthly thinking through it, definitely has to follow with these physical laws. So there's the spiritual way that pressure could operate, the concept of pressure, and the representational form. So we expand the concept of pressure when it becomes alive across the threshold. That's a good thing you could follow through. And you could follow through with viscosity, stones, animals, plants, and all these other aspects. But I'll stop this incredibly long video right now, and you can practice this stuff for the next 10 years ad infinitum. So this is Scott Hicks. Once again, you can check out my books if you'd like to. I also have the science fiction book, which still contained in mental images, but it does also take you through some interesting experiences, which are, more or less Luciferic in character, but fun nonetheless. Okay, have a great day. See you later.